Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Raw podcast. Phil here. I'm joined by my colleagues James Copley and Jason Jones as ever. Bear with us today. We're all running on fumes and caffeine after a busy but very successful day from a Sunderland perspective with transfer deadline day and then the 3-0 win over Burnley. So we're going to get straight into it. Yeah, James, it was a very unfamiliar feeling over the last kind of decade or so, turning up for a Premier League game and watch Sunderland pretty comfortably swat aside their opponent, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I thought Burnley were exceptionally poor. I think that was reflected in Scott Parker and Kyle Walker's comments after the game. They didn't offer a great deal. Having said that, though, I thought the game was a potential banana skin for Sunderland. They had to respond after the West Ham game, the tactical disaster. We spoke on the pod, didn't we, about what Le Bris might do, and sort of a throwaway comment at the end was he may well stick with Trey Hume and show some faith in him. He did that. You could argue he did the same with Ronaldo Mandava as well, who was hooked at halftime against West Ham, and it paid off. Sunderland responded. I thought Habib Diarra coming back in really added something to that midfield. Very unlucky not to go down as a brace. I think Sunderland will have to challenge that perhaps, but lots to be positive about. And I think from a mentality perspective, again, Sunderland have won after they've lost. They've done that 6 times this season, 36 points in the Premier League, still no back-to-back losses, still unbeaten at home. I don't think any team's gone down in the Premier League in the last 10 years with 36 points. So they can start to look upwards now, which is really nice from a fan's perspective. I think really important as well is the win without Granit Xhaka. I know we spoke on the podcast about it last week. You know, how does this team want to be viewed? Is it just a one-man band? Can they do it without him? Granted, it was against Burnley, who were extremely poor, but I still felt that Sunderland team on the pitch had a couple of gears to go, which is nice to think about that they could potentially improve. So another nice evening in what has already been a pretty good season, hasn't it? Really, I think if you'd have offered us unbeaten at home and 36 points by the 3rd of Feb, we all would have snatched your hand off. I believe this team are way ahead of schedule. It's nice to see.
We'd spoken a bit, Jace, after the West Ham United game, and obviously the kind of, as you would expect, the overriding emotion and discussion comes from a pretty desperate first half. But we had spoken a little bit about, an improved second half, and maybe is there a little bit of a template there with, Diarra and Le Fée in midfield, and we were kind of wondering how much of that was something improving, how much was it West Ham sitting on their lead. But it really does feel like off the back of last night that we are looking at some really kind of exciting partnerships taking place. And when you add obviously Xhaka to the mix in a couple of weeks, it does feel like the team is heading in the right direction in terms of Le Bris is getting more options as the season goes on rather than fewer, which is a nice place to be.
Absolutely. I mean, I know it's a cliche, isn't it? But I think Habib Diarra is genuinely going to feel like a new signing coming out the back of this January window. And I think that, yesterday was maybe the best illustration we've had of what he's actually capable of. Obviously, the start of the season, he was still very much finding his feet in the Premier League. It's a difficult transition to make for any player. But I thought last night he was magnificent. I thought, again, Enzo Le Fée, the amount of work that he gets through, it still sort of astounds me a little bit, because in my head, there's still that part of me that thinks, well, he is a very technically proficient player. He's a little bit flair player, a little bit mercurial. But then the graft that he puts in alongside that just makes him such an asset in the Premier League. And again, Noah Siddiqui, he sort of sometimes goes a little bit unnoticed. I almost feel sorry for him because, he plays alongside a Granit Xhaka who is just imperious every single week. Or, in the case of last night, he plays against Habib Diarra, who's running riot in the middle of the park. And he sort of just goes about his business quite quietly. But he is so important to what the Sunderland side does. And so, if you're looking at a midfield three of Enzo Le Fée, Habib Diarra and Noah Siddiqui, it's not a bad option to have, is it? With or without Granit Xhaka to come back into the side. So really, really positive from Sunderland. Word for Brian Brobby as well. I'm sure we will get on him properly. But I thought that, again, the way that he brought the likes of Diarra and Le Fée into the game, he's just such a unique proposition in the Premier League. He's such a handful, such a problem. Thought he had another barnstormer of a game last night without getting his goal, and he had a couple of opportunities to do so. But you're absolutely right, all across the pitch, really positive signs. And we were at Turf Moor at the beginning of the season, Phil, and Sunderland obviously lost that game 2-0, never really found their rhythm. And I think on the day, it's probably fair to say that Burnley did deserve to win that. But to see the comparison as to where the two clubs are now, last night, over the course of the month since, I mean, it's just night and day, isn't it? Sunderland have come on so much. Burnley have wilted so badly. But obviously, you know, like you say, from a Sunderland perspective, really good things last night.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good kind of point to dwell on a little bit more, Jace, in terms of when you look at Sunderland in those opening weeks of the season. Obviously, the Burnley result was a bit of an outlier, but it was a team where you felt like the first goal was massive in the game, where at that stage we were quite set-piece dependent. Now, certainly away from home, you could probably still argue that's the case, but I think last night underlined the development of this side in quite a short space of time, because if you contrast kind of the way Sunderland was set up at that stage of the season compared to now, you know, with Enzo and Diarra, with obviously what Brian's doing, Michele from right back, who has added so much, hasn't he? It feels like the team is, you know, it was sometimes hard to see Sunderland scoring from open play in the early weeks of the season. It absolutely doesn't feel like that anymore, does it?
No, it doesn't, and it's nice that there are threats developing all over the pitch. I think Jason's right to highlight Brian Broby, because he's just an absolute menace, isn't he? He's awful to play against. I think he really bullied Burnley's centre-backs. He had them on strings. And obviously Habib Diarra as well. His willingness to break lines, run forward, carry the ball, I think is really important and impressive. But yeah, just a very nice time to be a Sunderland fan. And a word for Le Bris as well, because he doesn't let the panic of others get to him. He's very good at blocking that external noise out. And there was a fair bit of external noise after West Ham. That first half wasn't the best, and tactically it all seemed to go to pieces for Sunderland. But he just stays the course, doesn't he? He doesn't let a little blip really affect his thinking. And I think that's an underrated skill for a head coach, and his mentality is to not let too much get in the way of your thinking. Yes, he's a pragmatist, but he's also an idealist in a sense that he believes in himself and the setup and his team and his tactics. And I think that's very important. I mean, we spoke to Trey Hume after the match, and you could tell that he was very pleased at the way Le Bris had backed him after the West Ham game. Obviously retained the captaincy, started the game again. These are big calls that the Le Bris had to make, and they paid off in the end. And the easy thing to do would have been to change that. I'm sure we'll come on to it, but you know, we had a story about Gertruida, and again he didn't even get on the pitch. So there's that as well. That would have been the obvious change to make, but he resisted, and it paid off for Sunderland. That said, I think Sunderland could have put out pretty much any team or tactical shape last night, and I think Burnley still would have struggled.
Do we think, Jason, that I do wonder if the Liverpool sort of story, that mini drama over the weekend, made Le Bris's mind up for him in terms of Gertruida starting the game, because, you know, at a point where midway through Sunday we thought it was probably more likely to leave. I mean, that must have had a massive impact on the game preparation, mustn't it? And having said that, still a bold decision, I think, to stick with you, and one that was vindicated. But I think it felt always unlikely that Gertruida was going to come into the 11 after kind of what happened over the weekend.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You make your preparations, don't you, based on the players that you know for certain are going to be able to play a part. And like you say, it did feel very much as if Luciano Gertruida was leaving the club, and it would have been a remarkable story if he had. Obviously, second time it would have happened to Sunderland as well. The whole Mark Gui thing over the summer, to be sucker punched again by it would have been a real turn up for the Bucks. But I mean, first and foremost, I'm really pleased that Gertruida's staying. I don't think I'm alone in saying that. I think his versatility is so important to what Le Bris likes to do. I think that in every position that he's played, some more than others, but in every position that he's played, he's given a good account of himself. And I think that replacing him, especially at that short notice in the window, would have been nigh on impossible. In terms of bringing someone who would have been, you know, of a similar quality or an upgrade, certainly, someone really would have struggled to do so. So first and foremost, like I say, I'm pleased that he's staying. But you're absolutely right. I think that as soon as it was sort of, you know, there was that and ahhing about whether or not he was going to be available, then it does make Le Bris's mind up a little bit for him, doesn't it? But again, I come back to what I said before. I think that if you've got the option to play a midfield three of Siddiqui, Le Fée and Diarra, I still believe that almost picks itself. You know, if Diarra is back to full fitness, and he showed last night that he absolutely is, obviously played at AFCON as well, then, you know, he's the club's record signing, and he's shown really positive signs over the sort of fledgling stages of his Sunderland career. So I think he had to come into the side, especially based on what he showed in the second half against West Ham, where I thought he was Sunderland's brightest player. As for the Hume decision, obviously there would have been an argument to take him out the side because he did have a bit of a stinker against West Ham. But I also think it's pleasing to see Le Bris sort of, continue to act with that level-headedness. It was one bad game. It was one bad half of football from a player who was otherwise being pretty exemplary for Sunderland through the divisions and even after making the step up to the Premier League. So really pleasing to see that show of faith. And like you say, I thought Hume absolutely repaid it last night.
Yeah, I think Le Bris is very much from the school of giving players one game too many rather than one game too few, isn't he? And I think that's served Sunderland pretty well over a period of time. Sadiqi's a really important part of this little puzzle, isn't he, James, at the moment, with Xhaka being out, because I think one of the things we've talked about this season is maybe a little bit of anxiety around there not really being a like-for-like replacement for Xhaka. Now, clearly Sadiqi isn't that, but I thought last night showed he has most definitely got the quality and the discipline to play that kind of 6 role, because obviously, ideally, he'd play further forward, getting around the pitch, wreaking a bit of havoc, pressing, all that kind of stuff. But thought last night, albeit against pretty limited opposition, gives you a little bit of confidence, especially off the back of the West Ham second half, that he can, for however long it is, he can slot into that role.
No, he did well. I think that midfield, it does look a lot different, doesn't it, with Diarra in there. Sadiqi maybe played a little bit further back. Again, Enzo Le Fée was fantastic. In terms of Sadiqi against Burnley, I thought, because Sunderland had the ball so much, Phil, you're going to have to stop typing it. Or mute yourself. It's all we can hear is typing. But in terms of... I just couldn't hear myself think. But in terms of Sadiqi against Burnley, I thought because Sunderland had so much of the ball, it was a pretty easy game for him. That said, he did very well. I thought he was excellent in possession. He retained the ball really well, recycled it. He just gets around the pitch so often, so well. He's a great asset, and I think he's still only 21 years old, which is just insane. The maturity of him in the game. But yeah, interesting problem to have, because that midfield's looking stacked, and when Granit Xhaka comes back, some of the comments have alluded to it. Does he get back in the team? I still think he probably does. But as I said on the pod last week, I genuinely think Le Bris has the solutions to get around Xhaka being out for a couple of weeks. And yeah, very exciting. I think all the midfielders Sunderland they've got a nice blend, because they all tend to do something that the others don't. They all seem to work quite well with each other. And Jace alluded to it, but Enzo Le Fée, he's so good. I know we talk about Granit Xhaka being one of like the best players we've ever seen at the club, but Enzo Le Fée must be one of the best midfielders we've seen in our lifetime, because he's just so classy. The ball is like glued to his feet, but he does the dirty work as well. I think it's an underrated part of his game. Sadiqi does get a lot of the plaudits for the ground that he covers, and rightly so. But Enzo Le Fée likes getting a foot in as well, and he's very strong for his build. So yeah, lots to be positive about, I think.
Yeah, the Enzo one, James, is because I'm pretty sure his debut was away at Burnley about a year ago when Isidore missed those 2 penalties, and straight away playing off the left, you could say, yep, got loads of quality. This guy, really talented player. But it's funny, like a year later, for him to be running Premier League games and looking so far ahead. I know Burnley were poor last night. Clearly a lot of their players are better than what they showed, but looking like, for me, a top half Premier League centre midfielder in all facets of his game.
Well, he's done really well, because, as you mentioned, he came to Sunderland, played off the left, and in the first couple of games in the Premier League, he was operating off the left as well. And there was this big question mark, wasn't there? Can Enzo Le Fée play in the middle? We saw him sort of play there once or twice, and he perhaps didn't perform to his full potential because he hadn't had a run of games. But now he has had a run of games in that sort of hybrid number 8, number 10 spot. He is just absolutely mesmeric. He's really grown into it, and he's just such a classy footballer. And again, I think he's really benefited from that vote of confidence from Le Bris. And it makes you sort of question yourself and think, are we all daft for even thinking, a little bit of time ago that Enzo Le Fée couldn't play in the middle, because he just makes it look so effortless at the moment. And I'll reiterate, I think his off the ball work is underrated. I think it's absolutely exceptional, and he does help his fullbacks out a lot as well. He gets over to the wing. He's very mobile, very agile, can strike a ball, can pick a pass, and I still think he's got a couple of ceilings to go as well. I still think there's more to come from Enzo Le Fée.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? He gave that really good interview in L'Equipe a few weeks back, didn't he? When he talked about the sort of the work he's done in the gym and some of the tactical things he's worked on as well. So clearly, it's been a discussion internally at Sunderland as well in terms of how they're getting back to that player he was at Lorient. But I do think, Jace, we're talking about how Habib Diarra, can make a difference in so many areas. Allowing Enzo probably to operate a little bit deeper feels like one of the many, many positives that he can bring to the side, because when Diarra is getting close to the striker and making those runs into the box, feels like there might be a bit more license for Enzo at times to drop a bit deeper and get more touches of the ball. And feels like it can only really be a good thing for the team moving forward.
Yeah, especially when he's playing the way that he is. I mean, again, hark back to when he first came in, and we were all sort of under the impression that Sunderland had signed a sort of pure number 10, and then it was only really sort of, discussions in the French media and that saying, well, actually, no, this boy can play as an 8. He can even play as a 6, we've been told. He can play anywhere in that sort of midfield trio, that midfield cohort. And I fully agree with you. I think that, he's so comfortable dictating games, isn't he? He's got such a sort of metronomic quality to him. And then on top of that as well, when you combine that with his willingness to fly into a tackle, to chase people down and pickpocket them out of possession, I think that he is so well suited to playing in that slightly deeper role. And like you say, when you're bringing in a player of Diarra's quality to then play in a slightly more advanced position, it's no hardship to the team, because Diarra's so well suited. I thought we saw it last night. He's barely played, and he hasn't played at all really alongside Brian Brobby. And I thought that already there were signs that the link up between those two was really, really promising. He just seemed to understand Brobby's game and understand his sort of ability to gamble on Brobby's ability to hold the ball up, that understanding that actually if he does sort of edge his bets a little bit and get up around him, then there's every chance that he is going to end up in possession, because Brobby is so adept at bringing the ball down and bringing other players around him into the game. So yeah, like I said, it does create that headache, doesn't it? Because then you start to look at, obviously Xhaka will come back in the team. He can't not come back in the team. He's been Sunderland's best player this season, arguably one of the best players in the Premier League. But then you start looking at it and go, right, well, you've got 3 other players to slot into 2 positions, and they can all arguably, sort of do a job in any of those positions. So it is going to be a difficult one for Le Bris, but what a position to be in, because we're so used to Sunderland being in sort of a complete inverse position, aren't we, where they haven't quite got enough bodies to fill the positions, or they're having to sort of force square pegs into round holes. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward. But like I say, it can only really be a positive thing, can't it?
I think we've seen enough this season just to know that someone will get injured or suspended at exactly the point where everyone's available. It kind of feels like it's been going that way all year. Well, obviously a really comfortable and emphatic win. Should we reflect a little bit on the kind of the end to the transfer window and deadline day, which there was a little bit of drama at the end, but on the whole, a relatively quiet month. I mean, I think it was obvious that Sunderland were looking at this window as a really important one in terms of doing the boring stuff, James, in terms of finding game time for players who were kind of either on the fringes of the squad or not in the squad at all, and almost reshuffling and rebalancing ahead of a big summer window. Maybe not the glamorous stuff to us and for fans, but kind of the really important work that needed to be done.
Yeah, I think the flip side of it, as you allude to, in terms of players leaving, is really important. Anthony Patterson, Dan Neil, they deserve to play games. Presumably Sunderland will have benefited from them leaving financially as well, in terms of down the line if those 2 clubs in question get promotion, but also wages being covered or a percentage of. Arthur Masuaku as well going out on loan. His wages were pretty sizable. We've been told. Timothy Pembele going. Leo Hjelde, 22 years old, probably needs to start playing games. Adji Alisi, brilliant centre back on his day, but has been so unlucky with injuries. Good to see him go out on loan. Jay Matete, still only 24 years old. Good to see him get a permanent destination. Patrick Roberts leaving the club, very sad, obviously. Adil Aushish completing that move to Schalke, and the big one, I guess, was Simon Adingra, which allowed the other winger to come in. But I feel like Sunderland have done a good job of like really trimming the fats. Joe Anderson going as well, Blondie, who was 4th choice. So a shame that they didn't manage to get Paveda and Barr off the books, but I suppose you can't have everything. But overall, I think a really positive window for Sunderland. We weren't expecting it to be hugely busy, were we, when we spoke this time last week? But we caveated that by saying that if there is something that comes up that Sunderland feel that they can do, then they'll have no problem pulling the trigger on that. And it just so happened that the Angulo deal did materialise. Obviously, there was a little bit of a transfer chain in the sense that Adingra had to go. And I was talking actually to Steve Goldsmith of the Wise Men Say podcast before the game yesterday, and he made the point, and it's a good one, that it's nice to see Sunderland act quite decisively regarding Adingra, because he came in the summer for big money. It's been tough for him because I think he's struggled really to make an impact at Sunderland. I think that's fair to say. Le Bris, did he really trust Adingra? I don't think so. And I think you can probably tell that by the fact that he was starting to play Romain Mundle over him. So Sunderland have managed to move a winger on fairly quickly and acknowledge that perhaps that wasn't the best fit, and then get somebody else in that they clearly rate quite highly and who was quite exciting. So from that perspective, I think it's very positive. Obviously, they've got the goalkeeper Elborgen as well, who is a little bit of a different profile, sorry, to what I was expecting, in the sense that he's a younger goalkeeper. I was expecting maybe he's a bit more experienced, but by all accounts, he's very promising. And then you've got Talbi as well. We don't know what sort of impact he's going to be making, but could be one for the future. So overall, I think, pretty much as good a window as we could expect. On Sunday, I was wondering if it was all going to fall apart with Gertruida possibly going to Liverpool, but Sunderland stood firm. That didn't end up happening. We ended up moving a winger on who wasn't playing and getting one in who potentially will. So I think it's about as good as it could have gone. I was never expecting Sunderland to go and sign 2 or 3 central midfielders and, be really, really active. I think if you'd have said to us at the start of the window that Sunderland will sign 3 players, Phil, we would have said, okay, that's probably about right. And there'll be, I don't know how many departures are listed there, but maybe 6, 7, 8 departures. I think we would have all gone, yeah, that does sound about where Sunderland should be in January. We knew this squad didn't need wholesale changes, and so it's proved to be.
I think Gertruida was a big one, wasn't he, Jace? Because I think if Gertruida goes, not suggesting it's panic stations by any stretch of the imagination, but you could then, in theory, look at a few different roles in the squad and say there's a potential here where a couple of injuries, a couple of suspensions, you might get yourself into a little bit of trouble. Gertruida's staying allows you to go into deadline day thinking, well, look, this is almost anything we do as a bonus really here, because we know he can thrive in a few positions.
Yeah, I mean, nail on the head, really, mate. Like, it's what I was saying before, isn't it? It's that versatility. We know that he's obviously comfortable operating at the heart of defence, seeing him play at right back, but just the ability to be able to bring him in as a deep lying midfielder as well, and knowing that is an option, whether it be to see out games, whether it be because of injury, suspension, whatever. It's so important to what Le Bris does, and it's kind of similar with what we've said about Trey Hume in recent weeks as well, isn't it? It's not just what he brings, but it's the ability to do it across a number of positions. And that flexibility and what it affords Sunderland is so vital right now. So, yeah, as soon as you're able to secure Gertruida, it does then allow you to sort of look a little bit more outwardly. Obviously, the Adingra exit, I agree with James. I think it is pleasing in a sense to see Sunderland sort of say, you know what, this isn't working. What can we do to sort of amend that? By the way, I think it's a really good move for Adingra. I think that he'll be much more suited to playing in the French top flight. Obviously, we're talking about a team who playing in the Champions League. Very much feels like a move that could ultimately come to benefit all parties, and I think that's something that should be celebrated. And then this new winger coming in, he's by all accounts, and I say this as someone who doesn't watch the Belgian top flight on a weekly basis, but by all accounts, he's an exciting talent, and he's someone who has been contributing regularly. I think it's something like 10 or 11 goal contributions across 22 outings this season. He looks to, be the sort of player who can get the fans on their feet, really goes at defenders, really technically sound and very quick in terms of his ability to change direction, stuff such as that. So he should be a player who, if all goes to plan, some fans sort of take to their heart very quickly. But yeah, just to echo what James said again, I think in terms of what this transfer window was going to be and the sort of realistic aims for it, then I don't think we really could have expected too much more from Sunderland. Obviously, the goalkeeper deal was a little bit of a necessity once it became apparent that Patterson was probably going to be on his way out. Obviously, Talbi's one for the future, but before the window, we said, well, we'd like to see Sunderland bring in attacking reinforcements, ideally in wide areas, and hopefully Angulo will be exactly that.
I think it was really important, Phil. You touched on it slightly, but it was really important that Gertruida saga was very sort of brief. It was done and dusted in a day, and Sunderland found a resolution very quickly. I think had that bled in to yesterday into Monday, I think that could have been a real problem, to be honest. But I think good on Sunderland and the player for getting that sorted, because he, by all accounts, it was agreed with Liverpool, but Sunderland have managed to sort of talk him around and persuade him to stay, maybe offer him a bit more game time, all of that sort of stuff. So I think that there was a positive resolution found there was really important.
Jace, you could definitely get away with claiming you're a Belgian league expert. You've definitely got that vibe. I think you should just go for it. I don't think anyone would have questioned that.
To be fair, Jace is good enough at football that he could probably play in the Belgian Pro League. He's very, very, very good.
You definitely give Jupiter or whatever it's called vibes, Jace. So I think next time, just go for it. Commit to the bit. I think. Yeah.
It's because I'm too busy watching the Eredivisie every week, man. That's why.
Yeah. I can see that. I mean, it just because I think it's such an interesting point with Gertruida, James, because we talked a lot about the season about being like, yeah, good player, versatile, trigger the permanent option, lovely. I think this kind of whole little mini saga over the weekend, albeit that was wrapped up pretty quickly, probably demonstrates why it's a lot more complicated than that, because what we're actually talking about is a Dutch international Champions League footballer who is not getting a regular place in the starting 11. And he will, he's obviously happy to stay at Sunderland for the rest of the season, and he is happy here. But it is not a formality that he will be looking at this going, I'm definitely going to sign permanently, because I think what it does reflect the fact is that it's not, he doesn't have a settled place in the 11 yet. And for a player of his caliber, that's not where he'll want to be in his career.
No, absolutely not. And to be honest, I found some of the revisionism and the discourse around Gertruida a little bit wide of the mark, because when the news broke, there was a bit of recency bias, and it was just like, well, he should have been playing over Tri-Hume all along, and he should have just been Sunderland starting right back. Nobody was saying that, 3 or 4 weeks ago when Sunderland were, doing really well. Tri-Hume's been very solid this season. His form has maybe dipped a little bit at times, but there hasn't been a clamour, West Ham aside, for Tri-Hume to be out of this team. There hasn't been a massive clamour for Gertruida to be in this team either, although Sunderland fans acknowledge that he's an exceptional player. As you mentioned, Dutch international, very versatile. But Sunderland have done really well. Where is he supposed to have played? After West Ham or during the West Ham game, I completely agree. Perhaps he should have had minutes off the bench as well. I know he didn't come on in the Newcastle game. There's other games as well. But I did find some of the revisionism slightly annoying in the sense that where is he to have played? And, he did play against Brentford, didn't he, away from home, and Sunderland got done, quite badly there by Keith Andrews' side. So I wonder if that stuck in the mind of Le Bris. But he is a player that I'd like to see more of, because I think he's very good. But it's funny, isn't it? Because we say that the best thing a player can have is availability, and he's had that. But sometimes what can sort of hamstring you, I call it the Phil Neville effect, where you're good enough to play in multiple positions, but it's really hard then to nail down one. So I'm not really sure what the answer is going forward for him. Presumably he's been, or something's been said to him, Phil, you would imagine, to make him stay, make him content, make him happy. So I'm expecting to see a little bit more of him. Where he plays, I'm not really sure, because Tri-Hume's captain in the side at the moment did well, so he's got that spot sort of locked down. Nordy's the right back and looked really, really good yesterday. Does he come into a midfield containing Siddiqui, Diarra and Le Fée at the moment? I don't think so. He can play left back, but, Mandava's there. So I don't know. Where do you guys see him coming in? Because I'm struggling at the moment. Sunderland are doing well.
No, I think that's the challenge, isn't it? And that's what I'm driving at. It's a really odd position where, he's a lovely player from the outside to have in your squad because he gives you so much reassurance, but his route to the starting 11 doesn't look particularly clear to me, and I just wonder how that develops. I mean, probably the only position, Jace, that I think we might have liked to see Sunderland strengthen was probably on the right. I know they signed Jocelyn Talbi, but it doesn't feel like one for right now. Are you happy enough with the options that Sunderland have going in that position for the rest of the season, given that we think Traore is probably about 3 weeks, a month away from being back fully fit?
Yeah, I mean, again, I absolutely would have liked to have seen more reinforcements on the right-hand side, but it kind of depends on how versatile Angulo is as well, doesn't it? Obviously, he's a right-footed player who likes to cut in from the left, and I know that Sunderland prefer to play with, left-footed player cutting in from the right. But, if Le Bris is of the opinion that he is someone who's capable of operating on that right flank, then that would solve that issue. I think that it's a little bit bizarre, isn't it? Because when he came in on deadline day during the summer, everyone sort of felt as if Traore was a bit of an afterthought, was a little bit of a sort of, not panic buy, but, not necessarily someone who Sunderland needed or, in a sense, particularly wanted. But over the course of the season, he's established himself as a really important player to this side. And as the other options have sort of fallen away a little bit, and it's become apparent that a lot of the wide options prefer to play on the left-hand side, Traore's importance has sort of grown exponentially. So I think that when he comes back, there's still a very good chance that he sort of comes straight back into starting 11, or at least, gets plenty of minutes. That being said, the other thing to consider is that Le Bris evidently sees Trey Hume as an option on that right-hand side. And while he may not be, sort of the most potent attacking force, he's not going to score any goals thus far. But, he's not going to contribute in the same way that, we saw Talbi did last night or anything such as that. Like, he is also a body who can do a very, very good job and quite a specialist job on that right-hand side. So, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, I think ideally I would have liked to have seen someone bring in another out-and-out right winger, and maybe it's something that they'll revisit in the summer. You would have to assume that there will be more recruitment, and it would be a position that would be near the top of their list of priorities. But I'm not sat here overly concerned about it, because I do think that, especially once Traore is back and fully fit and in contention, they do have enough to get through the remainder of the season.
Diarra has to be a potential option out there as well, doesn't he, James? I'm not saying it's the ideal scenario, but when I look at the role that Hume plays at the moment in that position, I think Diarra definitely could be someone who could do that, couldn't he? It looks like it would be an all right fit if Le Bris feels he needs it at some point in the season.
Yeah, well, he's got all the attributes. He's very strong. He carries the ball well, strikes the ball well. So I definitely think he can play out there. He came on, didn't he, away from home somewhere after his injury, Brighton away, didn't he? He came on the right-hand side. So, yeah, I'm comfortable with the right winger situation. I think Sunderland have got enough bodies through the door. I think it's something that can be revisited in the summer. Bertrand Traore to come back. Eliza Mayenda can play there if needs be. Habib Diarra. I think, Angulo as well. I think Sunderland have got enough now. Can we talk about Talbi, though? Because what a goal. I know that there's been a lot said about Sunderland's wingers, hasn't there, this January transfer window, that we needed reinforcements. And we did, and I think Adingra needed to leave, but I've maintained that he's a good player, Shamsdine Talbi. He's still very young, 20 years old. And that's why I've been hesitant to maybe say that Sunderland should go all out and just buy a new set of wingers, because I actually think they've got some good players at the club already, and I think they do just need a little bit of time. I think what gets lost with this side is that a lot of them are still quite young and inexperienced when it comes to the Premier League, because we've sort of been fine-tuned as Sunderland fans that like to put you in a retirement home when you get to the age of like 23, 24. You've played like 200, 300 games for us, and then like, thank you very much. But a lot of these lads are still learning on the job. I think there are solutions within the club. We don't know how good Talbi is going to be. As I say, it's something you can revisit again in the summer. Of course, you always want to push the squad forward, but for me at the moment, I'm quite content with what we've got, and I think a few of these lads could surprise us as well. That there's not going to be a lot of pressure on the rest of Sunderland season. They are safe from relegation, so I think they can go and start to enjoy themselves as well now.
Yeah, definitely what we've been looking for, wasn't it, Jason, from a winger to kind of put their hand up and make it happen, which is what Talbi did. But not a huge surprise in that I think whenever he's played off the left, he's looked lively, he's looked comfortable, and he's looked a goal threat, isn't he? And I think when we're talking about the balance of the side moving forward, listen, because of, Talbi will have to play off the right at times, but he looks like he's going to settle as a left winger, doesn't he, in time, certainly at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, while his consistency is I think understandably lacking. You know, that he's still so young. He's come into the, you know, quote unquote most difficult division in the world. It's also really important to note that there have been quite a few now really big moments from it this season. You know, obviously the winner at Chelsea, goal at Anfield, that goal last night. And I know, again, keep saying it, not to beat a dead horse, but Burnley weren't very good last night. But the goal was, you know, the size of the goal doesn't change. And it was a fantastic strike. So there are all the signs that he is only going to keep getting better and better. He's absolutely rapid as well, by the way. There was that moment, wasn't there, last night where he sort of knocked it and just ran down the left wing. And it was only sort of Kyle Walker, who, you know, famously one of the quickest players we've ever seen in the division, coming across to sort of give him a little nudge and knock him off balance. Otherwise, he probably would have gone all the way at the byline. So, you know, like I say, really, really promising signs from Talbi. I do much prefer it when he's on the left. I think he's more comfortable there. I think he looks much better there. But that's not to say that he can't adapt over time and he can't become more comfortable playing on the right if that's what's needed of him. You know, again, to reiterate, he is still so young, as so many players in the Sunderland squad are. So I think that James is absolutely right. He's one in particular who you look at and you go, right, well, let's not do anything too rash here. Let's not panic in the market, because actually in a year or two, who knows how good this lad can be. And I think that already he's well on his way to getting there.
I think with Sunderland as well in the transfer market, it's like optics are very important. The buying these players like Anguilo and Talbi to ultimately play them so they can improve and almost sort of help kickstart their career. If Sunderland start just bidding off these projects left, right, and centre that they've bought in the summer, I do think it reflects poorly. I think Sunderland is a club that has been built on giving these lads a chance, and within reason. When a player has shown something like Talbi has, bearing in mind he's been off to AFCON and come back, and he had a little niggling injury, didn't he, as well at one point. You know, he's been in and out of the squad. How good is he going to be in a couple of seasons? I think he's a really, really promising footballer, and I think Sunderland will do well and have done well to stick with him and some of these other lads as well. Because the easy thing to do, Phil, isn't it, is to change things when it's not necessarily going to plan. But, you know, players take time to develop. It takes time to settle into a new league, a new country. We spoke to him after the game, actually, and his English is exceptional, really bright. You can tell he's enjoying playing for the club. So I just think we are hard-tuned as humans in the modern era to want everything now, as the Arcade Fire song goes. But sometimes you do have to play the long game with a couple of these players, and I think Talbi's one of them. And he's, you know, but to flip that, he's producing moments for us as well. I'm a big fan of his.
Shout out to the underside of that crossbar, by the way. What a 12 months the Roker End crossbar has had. A true Sunderland modern great. Well, thanks very much for your company and your chat, boys. It's been an absolute pleasure as ever. We will be back sometime next week. We've got a busy one coming up, haven't we? Arsenal, Liverpool and the FA Cup. But we'll be back sometime next week to chat and to preview and all that kind of stuff. So thanks to everyone who's watched and thanks to everyone who's commented. Been really, really nice to have your company. And as ever, thanks, boys, and speak to you soon.